Daughter sent me a voice memo at 11:47 on a Tuesday night. Not a text, not a call, a voice memo 43 seconds long, and when I played it, it was just her humming. That's all, just humming. The first 8 bars of You Are My Sunshine, the way I used to hum it to her when she was small and couldn't sleep, and I'd sit on the edge of her bed in the dark and do it until her breathing slowed. We hadn't talked about that song in 20 years. She didn't mention it in the memo. She didn't say anything at all. She just hummed it, and then the recording ended. I sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. My name is Warren Fitch. I'm 58 years old. I spent 26 years as a loan officer and then a branch manager at a regional bank in Columbus, Ohio. And after that, I spent 8 years consulting for a credit union association, reviewing lending practices, doing internal audits, training staff to recognize predatory loan structures and fraud patterns. I have sat across from a lot of people in my life who were trying to take money that didn't belong to them. Some of them were obvious about it. Most of them were not. When my daughter sent me that voice memo, she was 32 years old, 11 months out from her divorce, and living in a rented house in Akron with a man she'd been seeing for 4 months. His name was Chet. I'd met him twice. Once at a birthday dinner for her in August, once when I drove up to drop off some furniture she needed. He was 41. He said he was a financial consultant specializing in real estate development. He shook my hand with 2 hands, the kind of handshake that's supposed to feel warm and ends up feeling like something being sold. My daughter's name is Rosie. She's been Rosie since the day she was born, and that's never going to change. Her mother, my ex-wife, used to say that Rosie came out of the womb already knowing what she wanted. That was true when she was a kid, and it stayed true. She's sharp. She works in human resources for a logistics company. She reads people well. That's what made that voice memo so hard to sit with, because if Rosie was sending me a signal she couldn't put into words, something had gotten past her guard, and for something to get past Rosie's guard, it had to have worked at her for a while. I called her the next morning. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been awake. "Hey," I said. "Hey," she said. "I want to ask you about the voice memo." There was a pause. Not a long one. Long enough. "I don't know why I sent that," she said. "I think you do," I said. Another pause. Then she said, "He wants me to co-sign something." I kept my voice the same way I trained myself to keep it for 34 years across a lending desk. Level. Patient. Not the voice you use when something trips an alarm. The calm voice. The one that keeps the other person talking. "Tell me what he said," I told her. She'd been seeing Chet since the previous March. He'd come into her life through a mutual friend, someone she trusted, and from the beginning he had been steady and attentive and funny in the dry way she liked. He cooked. He remembered things. He asked about her work. When she had a bad week, she said he was the kind of person who didn't try to fix it, just sat with her in it, which she told me was rarer than it should be. About 6 weeks ago, she said, he had started talking to her about a real estate deal he was involved in, a property development in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a mixed-use building, residential on top, retail on the bottom, the kind of thing he said was generating serious returns for a small group of private investors he worked with. He explained it in what she described as a low-pressure way, not a pitch, just conversation, the way you'd talk about your job. Then about 2 weeks ago, he'd mentioned that he was putting in his own contribution to the deal and that there was a financing piece involved. A bridge loan, he called it. Short-term, backed by the equity in the project. The lender required 2 signatures on loans over a certain threshold, he explained. Something about their internal policy. It wasn't unusual. He just needed a co-signer, someone whose name was on it alongside his. She wouldn't be responsible for the money. It was really just a formality. "How much?" I asked. She said $85,000. I did not say anything for 3 seconds. I counted them. "Rosie," I said, "before you do anything, before you sign anything or agree to anything, I need you to send me whatever documents he's given you." She was quiet. She said, "I haven't said yes yet." "I know," I said. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm asking you to let me look at the paperwork before anything happens. That's all I'm asking." She said she'd forward what she had. The forwarded email came through while we were still on the phone. I told her I'd call her that night. I didn't tell her what I was already thinking. There are things you don't say until you can back them up. The documents she forwarded were 19 pages, a loan agreement, or something formatted to look like one. The letterhead said Meridian Capital Bridge Lending Group, with a suite address in Nashville, Tennessee. The language in the agreement was dense and specific in some places and carefully vague in others, the kind of document that reads as legitimate until you know which parts to look at. I looked at those parts first. The collateral section described the security interest backing the loan as development equity interest in the Chattanooga Mixed-Use Project Phase 1. There was no property address, no parcel number, no attached appraisal, no title commitment. In any legitimate bridge loan secured by real property, you attach a legal description of the property, you attach the title work, you reference the appraisal. There was none of that. The property they were supposedly using as collateral didn't exist in any form I could verify from the document itself. The lender, Meridian Capital Bridge Lending Group, had a website. I pulled it up. It looked professional, good photography, a team page with headshots, a phone number and a Nashville address. I ran the address. It came back as a shared office space provider, the kind that rents you a mailbox and a conference room for 2 hours a month, not an office. Not a firm. I called 2 people that evening. The first was a woman I'd worked with during my consulting years, a fraud examiner named Bev, who had spent 15 years with the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions before going private. We had collaborated on 3 different cases involving predatory lending and structured fraud. She was precise and she was fast, and she answered her phone at 8 p.m. like it was the middle of the workday. The second was a man named Dwight, who I'd known since my first branch manager job in the mid-90s. He had spent his career in commercial lending and was now retired, but kept his hand in things. Dwight had a particular skill. He could read a loan document and tell you in 15 minutes whether the structure was built to function or built to deceive. I read Dwight's sections of the agreement over the phone. He stopped me twice. The second time he stopped me, he said, "Warren, the repayment schedule in this thing. Look at Section 7. The payment milestones are tied to project completion phases, but there's no definition of what constitutes completion of a phase. You could fund this loan. The borrower could claim Phase 1 as complete or incomplete or whatever serves him, and there'd be no independent standard to measure it against. You'd have no mechanism to trigger repayment. So there's no real repayment structure," I said. He said, "There's language that looks like a repayment structure. That's different." Bev called me back the next morning at 7:40. She'd spent the previous evening pulling whatever she could find on Chet. His full name, as it turned out, was Chester Roy Aldred, 41 years old. Grew up in Dayton, had a Series 65 license that had been surrendered, not expired, surrendered in 2019 following a complaint filed by a client in Indiana. The complaint alleged that Aldred had induced the client, a 58-year-old recently widowed woman, to co-sign a loan agreement for a real estate project that turned out not to exist. The client had lost $62,000 before the situation was discovered. Aldred had not been criminally charged. A civil settlement had been reached. The terms were sealed. I sat with that for a moment. I know what those sealed terms usually mean. Someone paid to make it quiet. And when it goes quiet, the man who did it gets to do it again somewhere else to someone new. 41 years old meant he had time to refine it, to get better, to learn which language made the documents look more real and which details made the relationship feel more genuine, and how long you needed to invest before someone trusted you enough to put their name on a piece of paper. "Is this registered anywhere?" I asked. "This Meridian Capital Group?" "No," Bev said. "There's no licensed lender by that name in Tennessee or any other state I can find. So the whole thing is a fabrication." It appears that way. The question is how far along she is and whether he has anything in writing from her. She hasn't signed anything. She hasn't said yes. Then we have time to do this carefully. Bev paused. "Does she know what she sent you?" "She knows I'm looking at the documents. She doesn't know what I've found yet." You need to tell her today. And Warren, you need to understand something. He picked her carefully. She's recently divorced. She's rebuilding her life. She wants things to be good. That's not a weakness. That's just being human. He looked for that specifically. I know, I said. I drove to Akron that afternoon. Rosie met me at the door of her rental house in the kind of clothes you wear when you haven't fully decided whether the day is starting or not. She'd been working from home. She looked like she hadn't slept well. We sat at her kitchen table. She made coffee she didn't drink. I told her everything. The Nashville address that turned out to be a mailbox rental. The collateral section with no property behind it. Dwight's analysis of the repayment structure. What Beth had found about Chester Aldred, the surrendered license, the woman in Indiana, the $62,000, the sealed settlement. Rosie sat very still through all of it. Her hands were around her mug and she didn't move them. When I finished, she said, "He told me he loved me." She didn't say it with anger. She said it the way you say something when you're examining it. Turning it over, looking at it from the side. I know, I said. She said, "He said it first." I didn't even say it back yet. I was still thinking about whether I meant it. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that would make that land differently. She had to hold it. After a while, she looked up and said, "What do I need to do?" I told her that we needed Chet on record making the request. We needed him to clearly articulate the loan, the amount, the co-signing requirement, the purpose. We needed him asking, not implying. In Ohio, you can record a phone conversation you're a party to without notifying the other person. If Rosie called him and asked him to walk her through the details again, said she had a few questions before she was ready to move forward, and recorded it on her phone, that recording was legal and usable. She'd need to not let on that anything had changed. Be warm. Be almost ready. Ask the clarifying questions a person asks when they're close to yes, not the questions a person asks when they're building a case. "Can you do that?" I asked. She looked at me with the same expression she'd had at age 9 when I told her something was going to be hard and asked if she could handle it. Steady. Not excited. Not frightened. Just ready. "I've been in HR for 7 years, Dad," she said. "I know how to listen to someone talk without showing them what I'm thinking." She called him that evening. She told him she'd been thinking seriously about the loan and she had a few questions about how the project was structured. She kept it easy. Curious, not suspicious. He was warm on the phone. Reassured her. He walked her through the whole thing, the loan, the amount, the timeline. He named the lender. He explained why her co-signature was needed, described it as a technicality, a formality, said the bank just needed 2 names for anything above a certain threshold. He told her the money would move within a week of signing and the project would be in active construction phase by the end of the month. He also said something she hadn't told me before. He said that once the project completed, probably 18 months out, there was a return she'd be entitled to for her participation, a gratitude payment, he called it. Not a return on investment, nothing formal. Just something he would personally make sure she received for helping him get this across the line. $30,000, he said, for doing him this favor. When she called me afterward, her voice was different than it had been that morning. Flatter, not upset. Just the voice of someone who now knew a thing for certain that they had only suspected before. "He offered to pay me," she said. "He said it was a gratitude payment." "I know what that is," I said. "It's so he can say I participated willingly, that I understood I was receiving money for it." "That's right," I said. "It changes the legal texture of the thing, makes it look like a business arrangement she entered knowingly, shifts the risk to her and off him." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm sending you the recording." She sent it within the hour. I listened to it twice. He was clear. He named the loan. He named the amount. He named the lender. He described her co-signing role. He described her co-signing role. He described the return. It was 44 minutes of a man walking a woman carefully toward the edge of something. I called Bev the next morning. I told her we had the recording. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Send it to me. I'm going to make some calls today." What I can tell you is that Chester Roy Aldred was contacted by the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions 6 days later. I know because Rosie called me when it happened. She was standing in her driveway. He had called her before the investigators reached him, she said. His voice was different, not warm, not patient, controlled in a different way, the kind of control that's trying to assess a situation quickly. He'd asked her whether she talked to anyone about the loan. She told him she had questions she was still working through. He said he understood, and that maybe they should put a pause on the whole thing for now. She said okay, and she hung up and she called me and she said he knew. They always know when something shifts, I said. The good ones can feel it before they can name it. It didn't matter by then. Bev had moved fast. The documents Rosie had forwarded were already in the hands of people who knew what to do with them. Chester Roy Aldred, as it turned out, had done this before in Ohio as well. A different name on the lending entity, a different woman, a different city. A 64-year-old school administrator in Youngstown who had co-signed a loan agreement for a development project in Cincinnati that didn't exist and had been out $78,000 for 2 years before anyone connected the dots. The Youngstown case had stalled for lack of evidence. The recording Rosie May provided the thread that tied it together. 6 weeks later, my daughter came to Columbus for a weekend. Just the two of us. Her brother lives in Portland and couldn't make it, but Rosie and I have always had an easy rhythm together, the way you develop with someone you've known since the first minute of their life. We ordered Thai food and ate it on my back porch and didn't talk about any of it for most of the evening. We talked about her job and a trip she was thinking about taking in the spring and a show she'd been watching that she thought I'd like. Regular things, the kind of conversation that feels like putting your feet on the floor after a long time in bed. After dinner, she sat with her tea and looked out at the yard for a while. She said, "I keep trying to figure out when I should have known." I looked at my daughter, this person I had watched grow from a kid who couldn't sleep without that song, into a woman who had sat calmly on a phone call and collected 44 minutes of evidence against someone who told her he loved her. "You knew," I said. "That's why you sent me the memo." She thought about that. "But I mean before," she said. "Before it got to that point." I said, "Tell me something. In those first weeks before any of the money talk started, was there a moment where something felt slightly off?" She didn't answer right away. "There was this one thing," she said finally. "Early on, I asked him once about a deal he'd been involved in before, something he'd mentioned, and he changed the subject so smoothly I almost didn't notice. And then later I couldn't even remember what the original thing was that he'd deflected from. And I remember thinking afterward, that was a very clean pivot, but I also thought maybe I'm being paranoid." "You're in HR," I said. "You know what a clean pivot looks like." She looked at me. "Yes," she said, "I do." "That's the thing about this," I told her. "The people who do it aren't looking for someone who's naive. It's the opposite. They look for people who are open, people who want things to work. People who have been through something hard and are ready to believe in something good again. That openness is not a flaw. They just figured out how to use it." She set her tea down. "The woman in Youngstown," she said, "did they get her money back?" "I don't know yet," I said. "These things take time." "But she has a case now that she didn't have before. Because of the recording. Because of what you did." Rosie was quiet. "I didn't do it for her," she said. "I did it because I was angry and I wanted to not feel stupid." "I know," I said, "but that's how most of the right things get done, not because someone was trying to be heroic, because they were angry and they wanted to finish it." She almost smiled at that. We sat out there until it got cold enough that we had to go in, and then we watched part of that show she'd been telling me about, and at some point she fell asleep on the other end of the couch with her feet tucked under my leg, the way she'd done since she was a kid. And I turned the volume down and let her run. There are things I want to say, as someone who's spent a long career in lending. These schemes work because they are patient. The person running them doesn't show up on the first date and ask you for money. They show up and they are exactly the right person at exactly the right time. They remember what you say. They show up consistently. They make you feel known. By the time any financial ask enters the conversation, you are already in something that feels real, because the time and the warmth were real even if the purpose behind them was not. The co-signing scam in particular is designed to feel low risk. You're not giving your money, you're just lending your name. You're just doing someone a favor. The reality is that co-signing a loan makes you equally responsible for the debt. If the loan defaults, the lender comes after both signers. If the loan and the lender are fraudulent, the complications are different but no less serious. Your name on a document is your exposure. There are things you can verify. A licensed lender operating in any state must be registered with that state's financial regulatory authority. In Ohio, that's the Division of Financial Institutions. You can search any lender's name in about 3 minutes at dfi.ohio.gov. Every state has an equivalent. Real estate used as loan collateral comes with a legal property description, a parcel number, a title. If someone hands you a loan document with no verifiable collateral attached, that is not paperwork. That is a prop. If someone asks you to co-sign anything, talk to your own attorney or financial advisor first, not the person asking, not their recommended professional, your own, someone with no stake in the outcome. And if someone in your life sends you a signal that they can't quite put into words yet, whether it's a phone call or a text or a 43-second voice memo of a song you sang to them in the dark when they were 3 years old, please listen to it. That instinct, the one that sends the signal before the person even knows why, is more reliable than any document. We didn't lose anything. We almost did. The difference was a 32-year-old woman who trusted something she couldn't name yet and found a way to say it without saying it, and a father who had been paying attention long enough to understand what she meant. I keep coming back to that 43 seconds, not to the investigation, not to the recording, not to the moment Bev told me Chester Aldred had done this before. I keep coming back to the moment before any of that, when I was sitting alone in my kitchen at midnight, listening to my daughter hum a song I hadn't thought about in 20 years, and understanding exactly what she was trying to tell me without being able to say it yet. That's the thing about doing right by the people you love. It doesn't always announce itself as a moral moment. It just looks like paying attention. It looks like 30 years of showing up and listening, and not being too proud to sit on the edge of a kid's bed in the dark and hum something until they feel safe. The reason Rosie could reach me that night wasn't because I'm particularly wise or particularly good. It's because I'd been present long enough that she had a language for it. We built that language together, one ordinary evening at a time. And when she needed it, it was there. What Chester Aldred understood, and what made him effective for as long as he was, is that people who have been hurt are not weaker than people who haven't. They're more open. They want things to work. They're willing to extend trust because they remember what trust felt like before it was broken, and they miss it. He didn't look for someone naive. He looked for someone who still believed in the possibility of good things and was willing to let them in. That's not a character flaw. That is, in fact, the better part of most people's nature. The tragedy is that it can be used against them by someone patient enough to identify it. But here is what I also know. Rosie didn't just feel something was wrong. She acted on it. That's a different thing entirely. There are people who feel the wrongness and talk themselves out of it because they're afraid of looking foolish, afraid of being wrong, afraid of what it means about the situation they're already in. Rosie didn't do that. She sat with the discomfort long enough to do something with it, even if that something was 43 seconds of humming into her phone at midnight because she didn't have words for it yet. That took a particular kind of courage that I don't think gets named enough, not the dramatic kind. The quiet kind, the kind that admits to someone you trust that something doesn't feel right before you can prove it. And then she did the harder thing. She sat across from a man who had told her he loved her, and she collected what we needed, and she did not flinch. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the same place the humming came from knowing that when things go wrong, there is someone who will pick up the phone. What I want to say to anyone watching this is that the instincts you have about the people close to you are worth something. The moment something shifts in someone you love, when they go a little quieter or reach out in a way that doesn't quite fit, that is information. Treat it like information. And if you are the person who has that feeling and can't put it into words yet, find your signal. Find the person who will understand it. You don't have to have the whole thing figured out before you reach out. Rosie didn't. She just hummed 8 bars of a song and trusted that I would know what it meant. We almost lost everything. We didn't. The difference was a phone call, a 44-minute recording, and a daughter who trusted her gut before her gut had finished forming the thought. That's enough. It always has been.